Hi, I'm Jeremy, the Zoo Nerd, coming to you live from Los Angeles, California. We're expecting a rainstorm later this afternoon, so it's a bit blustery today, a little bit cooler, but we need the rain, so it will be welcome when it arrives. Today we're going to talk a little bit in Critter Chat about one of my favorite species of birds, a species called the rainbow lorikeets. Now, I have seen them in the wild in Australia. I have interacted with them in a couple different zoo settings, mostly as a guest. And at my current job at the Aquarium of the Pacific, I often interact with them as an educator. So they are a very cute little species of bird with a lot of personality and some really unique adaptations to how they live in their world. So today's Critter Chat is going to focus on specifically the rainbow lorikeets. Now, as I was looking into more information about them, I discovered that they are part of a bigger family of birds that includes both a species called the lories and lorikeets. And there are disputed numbers of how many species of those kind of birds there are, but it's somewhere between 30 and 50 different species. We're going to focus just on rainbow lorikeets because those are the ones I have seen, those are the ones I know about, and those are the ones I've interacted with. Rainbow lorikeets can actually be broken down into multiple subspecies of different types. Usually they look a little different coloring wise, and they live in different places. So I was previously familiar with 3 subspecies, and I found out that there are quite a few more that live in a variety of different places. So for starters, lorikeets are part of the bigger parrot family. They are a parrot, although they are very specialized and pretty unique in how they function compared to most other parrots. They come from Australia and several of the surrounding islands in that South Pacific region. So some of those big islands would be places like New Guinea, and some of the islands up through Indonesia, and also some of the little islands out in the South Pacific like French Polynesia, Fiji, Tonga, and some of the other little islands there. They've also been introduced into New Zealand. I don't know if they were fully native there originally or not, but they are viewed as a pest species in New Zealand because they do some serious damage to farmers' crops. But lorikeets are a small bird. They're only about 10 inches long from their beak to their tail, but they are very loud, they're very social, and they have a lot of personality. They don't get pushed around easily by other animals. But they also have a very unique diet. They eat nectar exclusively. So nectar is the juice from flowers or soft fruits. Behind me is my little peach tree, so lorikeets would love that. They would love that now while it has flowers, and they would love it later when it has fruit because they would be able to eat those soft fruits. So things like a peach would definitely be something they would go after. Other things like apples or pears would also be on that list. Things with a thicker skin, they probably wouldn't be able to eat as easily, like oranges, but once an orange was open, they would quite enjoy it. They, like I said, exclusively eat that nectar, and they have a very specialized tongue to do that. And so on the tip of their tongue, they have little hair-like bristles called papillae. That's a kind of a fancy scientific word for like hair-like bristles. So they are sometimes called brush-tongued parrots. But those little bristles, once they stick their tongue out, kind of extend and flare out, kind of like a hairbrush or a toothbrush. And if you can imagine, like with a toothbrush, if you put it under the sink, it can actually hold quite a bit of water in those bristles. And the same is true with a lorikeet's tongue. So once they find a food source and they stick their tongue into that succulent flower or some juicy fruit, they would extend those little bristles, and that would help them to gather the nectar. And so when they're eating, they're doing this a lot. And they're flicking their tongue in and out of their food source, which is usually soft fruit or flowers, and collecting that nectar into their mouth, which is really different than any other type of bird and it's very highly specialized for a parrot type species. Most parrots eat seeds, nuts, or whole fruits or vegetables. And lorikeets, they actually are lacking something that prohibits them from doing that. Or they have it, it's just not very well developed or very functioning. And it's called a gizzard. Sometimes that's called a crop on a bird. And it's a special organ that's in a bird's throat that usually helps them to grind up things that they can eat. Now, some birds need that grinding more than others, but most parrots really need that. That's important for them to be able to crush down some of those seeds and nuts that they eat. See, birds don't have teeth. So when they bite it at first with their beak, that may break it initially, but they don't chew their food ever. They may use their beak to help open a nut or something like that, but they don't chew their food. They then swallow it. And that grinding process, like what we do with our teeth, is done further down in a bird in their gizzard or their crop. And with lorikeets, they have a very small gizzard and it doesn't work very well. And so they have to eat almost exclusively a liquid diet. And I say almost because they do eat some of the fleshy pulps of some of those soft fruits. Things like peaches or apples, pears, things that are going to be soft and really squishy that they can easily digest. Lorikeets, like I said, are very social. So they usually live as a mated pair, so a mom and a dad lorikeet, and maybe their offspring from the year previous, and then their newest chicks. And then they would also be pretty friendly with any of their neighboring pairs that would live around them. And together they would work to find food. They would travel around in small groups, less than like 20, to find food. But once they convene on a food source, if it's a really good source, you could see hundreds, possibly thousands together in one food source. So if that's a tree with a bunch of ripe fruits on it, or a tree with lots of bright flowers, or in Australia, there's places that feed the wild birds. And they sometimes get a lot of birds that gather at those places. As a social species, they also rely heavily on communication. And they have a number of different vocalizations that they use to kind of help warn each other of possible predators or threats, and also of food sources. Now, when I work with them at the aquarium, we have a big aviary that people can walk through, and the people can buy the nectar cups, little cups full of the juice that they can feed to the birds. And when they come in with those nectar cups, the birds are usually pretty quick to spot them, but they will sometimes make a sound, and you'll hear it throughout the exhibit of, hey, there's more food here. Same with if their keeper staff comes in and brings them more food, you'll hear that same vocalization. And that's them communicating that food is here, come get some food kind of thing. But they're really cute in their ability to communicate that. Sometimes at the aquarium, we have a hawk that flies over. When the hawk flies over, it scares the pigeons that are there. And when the pigeons get scared and they all start flying, the lorikeets realize, oh, there's other birds around here. Those birds are scared and flying. We should also be scared. We should also fly. And they'll all fly and kind of duck for cover, even though in their aviary, they're completely safe from any potential predator like a hawk. They also usually roost together in big groups. That means as it starts to get dark at the end of the day, they usually come to a big common place where they will sleep. If they're parents with little chicks or incubating eggs, they would be off on their own. But if it's not nesting season, they would be in a big roosting group. And they have numbered some of those in multiple thousands of birds that come together to roost. So they will usually gather kind of around sunset time because they're not very good at being out at night, and they don't want to be prey to any nighttime predators. So they would come and roost and settle in to where they're going to sleep before it gets dark. So pretty smart there. They also have a lifespan of between 15 and 20 years. So for a little animal, that's a pretty long time. Definitely in a captive setting, they could probably live a little bit longer because they have medical care. So places like zoos or the aquarium where they have vet staff helping them and maybe less competition for food, they would live a bit longer. Now they also, when they nest, they usually lay 2 or 3 eggs. and both parents will take turns incubating the eggs. And then once the babies hatch, they will both take care of feeding the babies. And they would do that just by eating some of their food, coming back and then kind of regurgitating that food back to the babies. And the babies, usually within about 2 months' time, are ready to leave the nest. And they will stick with their parents, kind of hang around them and learn where to find food throughout the rest of the summer season, and then kind of just join the bigger communal flock after that. And then they would kind of start families on their own when they're about 2 or 3 years old. Now, I mentioned a little bit at the beginning that they are sometimes viewed as pests, and that is because they have learned that farmers' crops are a good food source for them. Australia is a really amazing country that does a lot of its own food production and grows a lot of food for surrounding countries. So agriculture is very important to them, and growing a lot of their fruits and vegetables is pretty important for the people to have enough food. So they definitely get a little upset when the lorikeets come in and eat all the new little flowers that would then become fruits, like my peach tree here. Or also, once the fruits start to get ripened, they may start eating the fruits or berries before they can get picked. Now, there's some good work being done to help mitigate or kind of help counteract the lorikeets from eating those crops. And that some of the farmers have realized that on the edge of their property, if they plant bushes or trees that the lorikeets like, that have a lot of flowers, then those bushes and trees can kind of be a fence for the lorikeets, and the lorikeets will stop at those places and eat their food from those trees instead, thus leaving the crops for the humans and the farmers, which is pretty successful strategy. That's something that is being done with other animals that raid crops as well. I talked a little bit about that in the episode on elephants and how farmers are planting peppers to deter elephants from going into crops. Someone is asking, what do they eat? Lorikeets eat nectar, so they eat the juice of soft fruits and of flowers. But that sometimes means they would eat crops from farmers like peaches, apples, pears, and berries. Someone else is asking what my favorite animal is. I'll get to that in just a bit. So we're going to talk a little bit more about some of my experiences in working with lorikeets. If you saw the little video I posted earlier today, those are some wild lorikeets at a place in Australia along the Gold Coast called Currumbin Wildlife Sanctuary. And Currumbin's been a wildlife sanctuary there in Australia for many years. They do a lot of really amazing work, mostly focusing on local Australian animals. And when it first started, it was kind of a botanical garden and wildlife sanctuary. And the owner was getting frustrated because he was planting all these beautiful trees and flowers, and the lorikeets were coming in and kind of destroying all of his blooms. And so he worked with some bird scientists, specifically who had figured out what lorikeets need to eat. And he worked with them to develop an artificial formula. So it's kind of like a powdered mix that you could make into a nectar that's nutritionally beneficial for the lorikeets to eat. And they started feeding the lorikeets. And at Currumbin, they do that twice a day. I talked with a volunteer who'd been there for about 30 years. And he said when he was younger, they would sometimes get about 1,000 birds to show up to their daily feeding. So these were wild birds that had learned that at 10:30 in the morning, there was food at Currumbin, and they would all start to gather. And over time, the birds learned that that was a good food source. And so they do that now twice a day. They usually get between 400 and 500 birds at each feeding, which is pretty remarkable that that many wild birds know to come to that spot at that time of day, every day, to get some food. But those birds in the video that I filmed were totally wild, and they were eating that nectar. So that was in kind of like a pie pan, and they were eating that. So those birds are specifically a subspecies of rainbow lorikeet called a Swanson's lorikeet. You can tell that by their coloration. They have kind of that nice sunburst or sunset looking pattern on their chest. So kind of that red, yellow, and orange coloration. When I first saw lorikeets and was first learning about them, I thought it looked like somebody had taken a box of Crayola markers and used every color to color this bird, because it literally has so many different colors on it. Blue, green, yellow, orange, purple, red, and even black if you look at their feet closely. So very colorful birds, very fun birds to work with. I also, like I said, mentioned that I work at the Aquarium of the Pacific. That's in Long Beach here in California. And we have a walkthrough exhibit with the lorikeets, and I work in there as an educator, helping answer questions about the birds and helping people be able to feed the birds. And doing that, the birds have gotten to know me a bit, and so I often have some interactions with the birds there as well. There are a couple of very mischievous lorikeets that like to play with things like buttons or my name tag when I'm working there. There's one bird that likes to try to pull my glasses off. So they are very mischievous, like other members of the parrot family, but they are very cute. There are some species of lorikeets that are endangered, and several organizations have done some really good work to help with those. Those tend to be species that are native to very specific small island groups throughout the South Pacific. I know that the San Diego Zoo and Safari Park have done some really amazing work with lories and lorikeets in the islands of French Polynesia and Fiji. Our special shout out today is to two organizations. One is Currumbin Wildlife Sanctuary in Australia. They have a lot of really cool animals, and like I said, that's where that video came from of the lorikeets that I posted earlier. That was my video, I filmed it, but that was where it happened. And then also the Aquarium of the Pacific, which has lorikeets as well. And when I am going into work, when all this is over, I'll hopefully get to see the lorikeets every day again. People ask, what is my favorite animal? That's a really good question. My number one favorite animal are hippos, and we will be talking about them later on coming up this week. I have a plan to talk about hippos. I think it's on Thursday, so we'll be talking about hippos that day. My other top, rounding out my top 5 include bison, sea turtles, walrus, and a very cute little animal called the pika. And so we've talked about 2 of those already, sea turtles and bison, and we'll be getting to those others eventually. But I hope you've enjoyed what I've shared with you today about lorikeets. Look for more information being uploaded on the Facebook profile today. And also, if you haven't yet, you can request to join the Facebook community group under Zoo Nerd. That's a place where families can share different homework ideas, drawings, reports, anything that they're doing, photos, videos of animals. It's a place where we can build a community so that we can kind of share what we're experiencing together, learning about animals. I hope you're all staying safe, staying happy, and taking care of yourself. So until tomorrow, we will see you later. Thank you. Have a great day. Oh, and like, follow, subscribe, and share. Thanks.